Just some housekeeping. We will be recording the session, so if you're uncomfortable with showing your face, or if you wanted, please turn off your camera now. Please also mute yourself and put any questions in the chat, and they'll be picked up and bunched together by our chat administrator and put to Tim. We will try to get answers for you for any questions we don't have time to ask. An aid memoir will be sent to you after the session, so you have no need to take notes today, although you are very welcome to. We will presume that you know where your own fire exits and toilets are, and tea making facilities. And so without further ado, can we please introduce Tim Kenney, a commercial agent with lots of experience, who has agreed to talk to you through his brief presentation. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. You've probably seen, hopefully, a little bio that I put together for Claire, and I don't wish to go over that again, but by qualification, I'm a chartered surveyor. I work in the commercial property arena. I run my own company, that's it there. Kenny Moore. I am the front half of the pantomime horse. I'm the Kenny bit. Mr. Moore has been with me since 1995, and when we started, we were 2 men and a secretary. Now we're 2 men and a different secretary. So we work in the commercial arena. We work in commercial estate agency, and as you've read from my bio, I'm also relatively philanthropically minded. I'm a director of my own community interest company, which a handful of us started to try and make a difference. Now, we work in Chester, and perhaps you may think that that's in some way a kind of privileged arena, and it may be that that's the case compared with some of your own situations. But our problems are nonetheless still very specific. And in our role, we have a high street which has been absolutely decimated by a whole bunch of factors, not least of which has been the pandemic. And we have a bunch of properties that are sitting empty with no one to take them, which is a real drag and a drain on the high street. So our community interest company has taken leases on a couple of shops. We've got another one coming hopefully down the line, which gives local artists the opportunity to sell their wares. So I am working in your arena as a principal as well as an agent. First thing to say, with an agency perspective in mind, is you can expect pretty little help from my side. Now my world. Now, why is that? Let me explain. I'm self-employed. When you're self-employed, you're fee-driven. Okay, so we make our money, and people like me make our money out of letting properties to permanent tenants. We don't make any money out of letting properties to short-term tenants. So when you knock on the door of someone like me and say, "Can you help me?" the default position is probably we're disinclined to do so because I'm not going to make any money out of you. And that may sound capitalistic, but if you're aware of that position and the agent's perspective on it, then you can address that. And what I've tried to do in the presentation that you'll see quickly, and I will speak quickly because I've got a lot to get through, is I've tried to suggest to you that when you go out and talk to people about taking on property, predominantly in a lease arena, but I guess a lot of this would equally apply to freehold situations, right? Try and understand the nature of the company or the person or the individual you're talking to, and try and go to them with as many answers to questions, because the more that you can get ahead of the curve and deliver a package that all they've got to do to say yes is sign on the dotted line, the faster and better you will be at getting from where you are to where you've got to do. What I'm trying to say is you've got to put the work in. You've got to work harder in this third sector when you're pitching for properties, big or small. Okay. Second thing, I suspect that many of you will have issues and problems that has an element of sort of shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted about them. I can't deal with each individual question directly, but at the end of this, I'm sure we'll end up with some conversation, and if we get time to cover some of those things, I'm happy to help. What I'm trying to do here is to suggest a framework of how you go about putting this together in the first place. Okay, so this is talk about trying to get it right to start with. Okay, let's look at this first slide. So the golden rule, you can all read that. Most, if not all, the problems you encounter taking a property can be avoided if you approach things in a logical and structured manner. So what does that look like? Okay, so the next slide tells us that. Firstly, is this property actually suitable for what you want to do with it? Okay, ask yourselves some very searching but basic questions. And a reminder here, you don't need to take screenshots of any of this. It'll all come around later. Just follow me with this, okay? What are you trying to achieve, the bit in purple? Why do you want this property? What are you going to do with it? How long do you want it for? Does it have planning consent for what you want to do with it? What does it need spending? Does is the roof knackered? Does the alarms work? What's your cost of taking it on? Have you actually looked at it? And have you actually looked at it properly? Okay, would be my suggestion there. Do you need to employ some specialist? Is that a builder? Is it a surveyor for a closer look? If so, when do you get that person involved and how do you do it? And in your world, this is all about keeping costs down. I completely get that. So what you don't want to do is to invest a load of time and a load of energy in something and some costs in something that falls apart because you didn't actually try and follow a logical process. Next slide, please. So is there a good fit with this property, this particular property, okay? On this particular property that you've identified here, what's the landlord trying to achieve? Purple question, what's the landlord trying to achieve? So that takes me back to what I said earlier about let's look at what the other side want out of this. Too many people, particularly tenants, particularly where you're sat in, think about you, okay? That's a selfish attitude, right? This is another building that's owned by somebody else. So who's the landlord? Are they a company? Are they themselves a charity? Are they an individual? What are their aims and objectives? How closely can you match them, right? Fundamentally, a landlord wants two things out of a tenant: pay my rent and look after my building, okay? Now, I appreciate that what we're talking about here is probably more at the closer end of paying a nominal rent, but still looking after my building, okay? Are they paying void rates and void insurance? Why do I ask that? Okay, quick diversification to come back. The world that we live in commercial world is, if a property sits empty, then typically a retail property after 6 months will start attracting void rates. So if you're a landlord, you're sat on a vacant property, after 6 months, you get a rates bill from your local authority for the pleasure and benefit of not being able to actually let it. Which means that from a landlord's perspective, you'll come across a vacant property. It's actually costing the landlord to keep it empty because they're having to pay the rates while no one's using it. They're also having to pay probably twice their void insurance premiums because insurance premiums on vacant buildings are twice what they are when they're occupied. Now that's relevant because if you go along and say, I don't want to pay you any rent, but hey, we'll be responsible for the rates, we'll be responsible for the insurance, assuming that you're working in a charitable arena and you're a community interest company and you fit certain criteria, you'll be responsible for the rates, but there won't be any rates because you'll have an agreement. If you're a charity, you fall within pretty much total exemption. If you're a community interest company, go and talk to your local authority. We have an arrangement with Chester West and Chester Council where they will support us for up to 6 shops, rates free. Okay, so actually, by not paying any rent, you're actually still saving the landlord some money. Does that make sense? Talk to you later. Right. Will you be a permanent tenant? If so, what's permanent? Are you there from now to eternity? Will you be a temporary occupier? If you're a temporary occupier, who decides? Do you decide that you've got a break clause if it doesn't fit, or does the landlord decide? And if you've got a break clause, and if there's other things going on, what are the lead-in times to exercise you walking away from it? And what are the lead-in times for the landlord to take possession back off you if they find a better or a permanent tenant? Questions? Okay, next slide, please. Are there enough matches to make this work? As you've gone through your checklist, okay? Golden rule, lovely yellow. Always agree everything before you engage legals, okay? We have a phrase for solicitors. We call them deal prevention officers because most of the time, just in our permanent world, it's the lawyers that make a mess of it and we then have to unravel it. So don't leave it to solicitors to do this. Sounds like I'm having a pop at solicitors. I am. They're processors. They're not principals, okay? It's up to you to set the framework of the deal before you ask any lawyer or a legal advisor or anyone with a legal knowledge in your team to get involved, right? You set the rules. Property checklist, quick one. Is it structurally safe to actually enter? We're starting from the real basics here. So many people don't even get this right. Is it operationally safe to use and occupy? What's operationally safe? Okay, it's got asbestos in it. Has it got electrics in it? You know, is this safe? Is it a safe building? Are there any obvious issues or concerns? Are there bloody big cracks through this building? Is water tonking in? Have you got a forest growing out of the gutters? Okay, let's move on. Let's look at that in detail. Okay, so asbestos certificates, right? Usually when people hear the word asbestos, they run a mile. Okay, all I would say to you is asbestos is a product that's widely used as an insulating agent, but it's also used as a binding agent. Now, as a binding agent, you will find asbestos in thermoplastic floor tiles. You will find asbestos in window boards. You will find asbestos in certain ceiling tiles and products like that. Now, unless you intend to go and eat your building, this asbestos in this state is perfectly inert. It's only when it's broken that the small particles of asbestos become a problem. However, where you find loose asbestos, particularly where it's used as an insulator in older buildings around older heating and pipe work, then it's a problem. Okay, and this is not something that you can take a view on. Okay, where does this building stand with asbestos? You need to see an asbestos certificate and be aware that although you're a temporary occupier, even if a landlord was going to look to a permanent occupier, they've got to show that this building is free of asbestos and what we also call other deleterious products. So it's asbestos and asbestos related things. So is it safe? I mentioned electrical certificate, you know, straightforward. Water and drainage. How many times do you know, it may be people there you go and you go, well, where's the water? Where's the drainage? Oh, he hasn't got any water, Guff. Brilliant. So how are you going to run the loos? How are you going to run your taps, make a kettle and boil a kettle and all that? If it's got gas, yeah, basic things. Does it have a gas certificate? Fire certificate. Does it have a fire certificate? Bear in mind that fire certificates are quite specific about what you do with it. Okay. At one end of the thing, if you're running a nightclub, then your requirements for fire compliance is far greater with 500 people in a room than it is with 4 or 5 people in the same size space. So fire certification and alarms and sensors and firefighting compliances, they're very much geared about what you are going to do with the building. Water safety certificate. This is becoming increasingly a common thing. Legionnaires related, particularly if you've got bodies of standing water. Okay, we expect to see safety certificates. Then sort of more some basic things. Intruder alarms and codes. Who's got the keys? Is it secure? The little thing at the bottom, EPC. EPC stands for Energy Performance Certificate, right? It is unlawful to let a property without a valid EPC. And letting a property would equally apply to you as a temporary or short-term occupier to a long-term occupier. It is the landlord's responsibility to provide an EPC, and an EPC has to show that the building is compliant to a certain level. The bottom 2 levels, I think they're G and H, they're non-compliant. So if the building doesn't comply with a valid EPC, the landlord has to upgrade that so that it does. Okay, look at the bottom here in red. All these items above fall to the landlord. So you've got to be aware of that checklist, use your eyes, ask the questions, get all this information. Okay, is this a safe building? Is it a building you can walk into? Next slide, please. Okay. If it is, and only if it is, then we get to the conversation about what the topic is, which is the lease side of it, okay? And I know I've gone banging on about the other side of it, but if you don't get the first bit right, then this bit is never going to fit, okay? This is a quick checklist of things that you need to agree with your landlord, okay? I'll just very quickly run through them. Again, you'll get a copy of this afterwards, right? Basic things. Who are the parties? Where does the liability lie? So who's the tenant here? Now, if you stick your name on a personal lease document, personally, you are personally liable. If you stick your name on a lease document as a limited company, the directors of that limited company have some liability to this, but unless you are criminally negligent, it's very limited. Term, that's a posh word in our word. How long a lease have you agreed? What's the document? What's the term of the document? How long are you signing it for? When does it start? When does it finish? What type of agreement are you talking to use? Now, leases, there's no such thing as a standard lease, okay? And I will reiterate this later. Every lease license document is a handshake. Wow, what have you agreed? Verbal agreement? I've met this bloke in a pub, he gave me the keys. Oh, great. What type of agreement are we using? And how can you drive that conversation? There's a little bit of a technicality here. If it's a lease, we have a thing called in or out of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954, Part 2. Piece of documentation that goes back years and years and years. Your solicitor will advise you. But if your agreement falls within the lease, it gives you a little bit of extra protection. I wouldn't expect any of your short-term agreements to be like that. I would expect these short-term agreements to be excluded from the Landlord and Tenant Act because it's short-term, and I'm happy to take questions on that later. Break clauses. Right, what's a break clause? A break clause is exactly what it says. It's an opportunity for either party to break the lease, right? But who and when and how? Basic things. A day's notice, a week's notice, a month's notice, 6 months notice, 3 months notice, what? No such thing as a standard lease. Agree it. Rent, if any, yep. And if there is any, when's it payable? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Advance, behind, what? Agree it. Rent free. Have you agreed any rent free? Is the landlord going to give you 2 or 3 months to fix it up? If so, what are you going to do? VAT. Often grabs people in the backside here. VAT. I don't know about your individual statuses with VAT. A lot of smaller businesses and smaller CICs, for example, aren't registered for VAT. If the building is VAT, VAT follows the building. If a building's registered for VAT, you'll get a bill plus VAT. Now, if you're not paying rent, it's irrelevant. But if you're paying a modest rent, 20, 30 grand perhaps, and there's VAT on it, and you can't reclaim it, then again, we see that quite a lot. Rent reviews, perhaps less relevant in a shorter term environment, but if there are any rent reviews, what are they and when? Repairs and condition of the property. This is where we see most of the issues, because actually no one's agreed anything here. What does the building look like and who's responsible for it? One way of addressing this is you have to agree who's going to do what, and you have to do it at the start. Otherwise, once you've signed something, it's too late. One way of looking at this is to run around with a camera and a video camera, actually photograph everything that it is there, stick that on a DVD, and get that somehow attached to the lease or agreement you're using. Right, lawyers find this a bit of a strange thing, but it's perfectly acceptable to use digital media. But they're wedded to the quill pen. Right, doesn't need to be like that. Digital media is perfectly appropriate. But that's a great way of actually demonstrating that when you took this building on, that's what it looked like, and that the document limits your repairing obligation to that. Okay, it might be a get out of jail thing for you. Service charges. Have you signed up to some secret costs somewhere? Is it part of a building? Have you got a lift in it? You're going to suddenly pay a tenth of a lift cost? Service charges, beware. Sharing the space. What can you do with the space? Can you share the space with some mates, some friends, concessions, sublistings? What? Legal costs. Cost of Leases Act says that landlords and tenants will each bear their own legal costs. Right. The only exception to this is local authorities, who seem to have their own rule. So if you're doing a deal with a local authority, typically they will want their legal costs covered. Don't know why, it's just what it is. And we had to pay theirs on a deal we did in Chester ourselves as well. Buildings insurance. Who pays for it? Are you paying for it? Is the landlord paying for it? If the landlord's paying for it, are you picking up an apportioned element of that? Use and user. What can you do with it? Right? Basic stuff. Trading hours, signage. Is there any do's and don'ts? And then lastly, rates and outgoings. As an occupier, the liability pays rates falls with you. Remember we talked at the start about rating liability. You may, by simply signing a lease and occupying the building, you will pick up the responsibility for rates. So can you avoid rates? And what are the other outgoings? Thank you. Next one, please. Remember, there is no such thing as a standard lease or a standard agreement. Every document is crafted around what the parties agree, so don't get bullied. Right? I read that out deliberately. You're all capable of reading it, but let's just read that again. There is no such thing as a standard lease. So when someone says to you, "Oh, well, we've got our standard lease," it's cobblers. Right? It doesn't exist. Right? Documents are crafted around what the parties intend to do, and it's fine. Excuse me, when we have consenting adult parties. It's not fine when you find yourself in a situation where you haven't either read the document fully, or you haven't understood that what some of the clauses mean in your document, And by the time you've signed it, it's too late. And again, we see that time and again. So I think the next slide is questions. Look at that, 12:51, 11 minutes, boom. After this, Claire has asked me to do a little lunchtime bite-size 10 top tips, right? I can't condense all of that into 10 top tips, but what Claire and I have tried to do is pull out an aid memoir, right? So if you want to go with a lunchtime bite-sized 10 top tips, help yourself, fill your boots. But actually, I'd really prefer if you took away from you this, right? And when you come to apply your processes for looking at sites and taking on sites, you follow that, because that is a checklist and a methodology of how to go about doing it right. Your turn.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Tim. That was really, really interesting. I don't know if anybody has any, I can't see any questions in the chat, but I don't know if there's anyone got any direct questions, please put them in the chat. Or if anyone's got any experiences of any challenges they may have had, or good stories about they may have had where they've sort of looked to acquire buildings or lease buildings. So I throw that out to the room. So has anybody got anything? If people want to raise their hand or put it in the chat, I'm sure we can enable people to speak.
While people are thinking about that, I'll just give you a horror story. It's a big local area that I assessed as a plan assessor, and the local authority wanted the charity to pick up all their own internal legal costs. They wanted a full repairs and maintenance lease. They wanted the insurance, both sides, contents and the fabric of the building covered. It was a nightmare. So all of the stuff that Tim's just said, if they'd have thought about all of that at the beginning, it would have been great, because they could have avoided getting that lease from local authority. I will do the top 10 tips, but I will attach the aid memoir, and the top 10 tips actually refers to the aid memoir. So Tim's provided you with a good process for you to follow. And thanks, Julian. You've just said in the chat box that that was a brilliant presentation, and it would have saved you years on a degree course.
Oh, indeed. So listen, just want to pick up some of the questions. So I know Judy's had her hand up since the beginning. So if Judy wants to sort of speak, please, Judy, speak now.
Hi, yes, thank you. Judy Tulloch from Cars Areas Together, big local up in Solihull in the West Midlands. We're talking to the local authority about taking on a piece of land, of a sort of green space amenity area. So some of those things won't apply, but some of them will apply. And we're quite far down, you know, we're setting up a separate community development foundation. We're talking to a landscape architect that one of the other big locals has recommended. So, and we've had lots of discussions, Sport England, etc., etc. Presumably there'll be some kind of transfer. Would we get legal advice from our side, as well as, I'm kind of concerned about legal costs. You know, the local authority will have legal costs in preparing whatever document it is. Okay. Would we appoint solicitors as well from our big local?
Okay, so let's just step through that process again. Let's work out, actually, remember the documentation, Julie, follows what you've agreed to do. Okay, so yes, at some point in time you will be negligent not to get some legal advice. When you're dealing with local authorities, right, typically local authorities want to support the work that all you guys are doing. Right? That's certainly my experience in Chester. We've set this community interest company up. We went to the council and said, well, this only works if we don't pay any rates, because there isn't enough money in the business model to pay that. We have to pay the 20% of the rates bill. It doesn't work. So if you want the buildings to be occupied in the city centre and for us to do something with them while we're trying to find permanent tenants, right, we're enhancing the streetscape, and there'll be some resonance here around some of you nodding. We're enhancing the streetscape. We're doing this, we're doing that. Whatever it is you're doing, And in your case, Julie, a piece of land that's probably just lying fallow, not doing anything at all. And you've got a use for it, and it's great. And there are some community assets. You're going to employ people, and you're going to fill this need, and all this. It's fantastic. So typically, you'll find local authorities are very supportive of this because it's, well, cynically, it's a vote winner, right? But it's also common sense. But the same principles apply. You've got to set out how long are you going to use this land for. You've probably got to, in terms of land, you may actually need to have a think about planning. What is this land? What are you going to do with it? Does it need planning consent? If you're going to stick temporary buildings on it, probably it doesn't need planning consent. Probably. Not a lawyer, not a planning consultant, but I've been doing this job for 40 odd years. So what are you going to do with it? And take some sense checks about what compliance you need here. Does this land, has it got any servicing or services on it? I know. And do you need services or services? Are you going to make do with, freestanding toilets or whatever you're going to do with it? What are you going to do? Have all of that discussion with the local authority, consultation team, and get to what we call a heads of terms. Yeah. Once you've got that heads of terms, right, the lease, the license, the agreement, the handshake, the whatever it is, the conversation in the pub follows that process, right? Okay. You don't need to get a lawyer involved at this stage, providing you've got your wits about you. So if you've got your wits about you and you've got people in your team and supporters locally who are supportive of what you're doing, you'll be amazed what free skill sets you can harvest. Right? Stick it out on LinkedIn, stick it out on the local Facebook pages. You'll attract people who will help you. I need some advice on planning. I need some advice on land remediation, security, whatever it is you need to do. If you ask, I think you'll find that people are quite happy to come on board. But yes, you should probably always take some legal advice, but not yet. Okay? Agree what you're going to do, right? Because otherwise, as soon as you start going to a solicitor, ching, right? And away you start with your £200 an hour, £400 an hour, right? So don't do it. Spend all your time focusing on what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. Then when you've got that all boxed off, then you move to the actual documentation side. Does that make sense?
Thank you for that, Tim. Just one more quick question, because I know there's a lot. The questions are rattling in now. But just one quick question. The next one on the list, which was, I can't sort of see them now because people keep chatting to me. What's the difference or advantage, or differences and advantages of a lease or a license for a property? So if you can quickly wrap that one out, Tim. Okay.
So here's the smart arse answer to that, right? There is no such thing as a license in English property law. Okay, doesn't exist. Right? Has no legal validity. We write them every day. Right? We call them licenses. Actually, they're leases with a different name on it. So that's the smart arse answer. The more practical answer to that question is a license typically will be a shorter time. Solely, there's a consideration which is rent, but it could be kissing the barmaid's wife once a week, doesn't matter. There's a consideration, and you have it for longer than 6 months, your occupation automatically falls within this Landlord and Tenant Act 54 Part 2, and the principal tenet of that long-standing act is to give the tenant, different tenant, the right of occupation. So whether you go down a lease or a license, if you're looking at short-term occupation, what you'll tend to find is there's a piece of documentation that sits alongside either your lease or your license that is an affidavit that takes this documentation out of the 1954 Part 2 Act. We're getting into a quite deep and convoluted water. I'm happy to pick this conversation up later on a one-to-one if that's helpful. But yeah, and so what you'll find is that landlords are happy to support you in doing what you do, but they don't want to find that in 2 years' time, what they want to do with their piece of property or land longer term is frustrated by you going, you can't kick us out because we've got security of tenure, right? So that's where you tend to find that conversation about lease or licenses. But typically, licenses are used for much more shorter things. But It's the same principle. Whatever it's called at the top, it's what's written in the document that's the really important bit. Okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. A question from Roger, and I know we sort of covered a bit of these, but I'll put them out as well. Are there any particular issues to address or work around when leasing from a local authority? So is there anything else other than what we've already spoken about that you can add in there, Tim?
Typically, local authorities tend to be typically, local authorities are very process driven, okay? And that they're full of people who are responsible for their own little empires. So in my experience of local authorities, generally, the first thing is expected to take about 4 times as long as it should, right? And also expect to play the political game. Bear in mind that local authorities are made up of, and some of you may be councillors, you may be elected councillors, right? So the councillors are the elected members, typically every 3 or 4 years, right? You're the shareholders, right? But the directors who run the company are the council officers. And how it should work is that the councillors, the elected members, are responsible for making policy, and the officers do it. Typically what happens is the other way around. The officers decide what they're going to do and tell the elected members. So if you're there's a few nods there you go. So if you're coming up against a little bit of unhelpfulness in local authority world, play the politics card, right? Go to your local member and go, I need your help because I can't get this to go, right? And this is all about vote winning, and that's about getting your own way and understanding how your local authority works. But sometimes you'll find that, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, sometimes failing. Sometimes you'll find that officers jump to those who are making the most noise. And if you can generate a little bit of internal pressure to bring those officers to bear and do the job that they're paid often handsomely to do, then well done. Does that help?
Oh, that's brilliant, Tim. I think we've all echoed that. I mean, I was once told those that shout loudest get stuff done, not those in most need. So shout loud. This is a really interesting question, definitely taking into some of the other stuff you said. From Sharon around renting an office within a local authority community centre, and they've been advised to move from a licence to a lease. Is a lease better?
Okay, describe, Sharon, are you the lady with the headset? Wave at me. And now talk to me, Sharon. What's behind this question?
Well, this has been going on. Well, I was nodding internally when you were talking about how long this thing takes. It's probably about 6 months now. And basically, we're just renting a room in a community centre, and everything was fine. We're going down the license route, and then all of a sudden it switched to a lease. Because it would be better, and I was trying to pull up the emails for what she said. I put here, I know the terms of license and lease do differ. I understand we would have sole use, and she's put yes. Likewise, what would our repair liability be when we yield up the room at the end of the lease? And she's just put clean and tidy and lesser damage in 2 years. They're not expecting carpets and painting and stuff like that.
Don't stress about what it says at the top.
Right.
It's not relevant.
Okay.
It's about what you've agreed to do. Okay, so smart ass comment, there's no such thing as a license. We use them every day.
Right.
Notwithstanding, okay, but it's about what you've agreed to do.
I think where I was coming from, Tim, I didn't want to get locked. Originally it was going to be 12 months and they were pushing for a 2-year one, and I didn't want to sign up to something that there's a little bit of angst at times with users and stuff like that. Okay. So I was trying to navigate not being locked into something that if it didn't work out 6-12 months down the line.
But do you know what I do? Do you know what I do? You're going to incur a set of legal fees, and this is relevant to all of you out here, so let's have some nods here. When you go into one of these things, you're going to incur some setup costs. Some of those setup costs are going to be legal, right? So if you're going to incur these costs, why on earth incur them again in 6 months' time?
Yeah.
And then another 6 months' time. You're far better agreeing what you're going to do, seeing as far as you're going to see, and maybe that's 2 years or 3 years, Sharon.
Yeah,
but what you actually do is you pick one of the lines from that crib sheet earlier, break notices. So if you want to determine your occupation of this, to move next door or to move out, or whatever it is, expand or contract or whatever, you serve a break notice and you trigger an end to that relationship. Okay, just because you sign something for the 3 years That doesn't mean to say you've got to stay there for 3 years. Remember, you're building something around what you want to do. So I go down the lease if that's the line of least resistance. It's a word. It doesn't matter. Right?
Okay.
Sign it for 2 or 3 years because it's the same cost to you to do that. Right?
Okay. But
build in break clauses so that you can trigger a break clause and walk away. And be careful on break clauses, by the way. There are libraries of case law about what's an effective break notice, right? The only thing that you need to put in a break notice is that I will pay my rent up to date. That's it. That's the only condition you should ever agree to in a break clause, because everything else is covered by the lease or the license document. Your license document will say, keep it clean and tidy and da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. And at the start of it, Sharon, get your camera out, photograph the scuffs, photograph all the shitty carpets, right? And away you go. And that's your conversation to hand it back. So it's all about thinking about what you're doing. And it's easy for me to say, because I've been doing it a long time. So I've stood on all the landmines, right? I've seen it all. So yeah, think about what you're doing. But as an aside to this, which is an extension to an answer of your question, right? And I'll use my own CIC as an example here. When we make a pitch for a property, which we've just done to a little company called the Chester Racecourse, there you go. I put together a pitch document, and it says, yeah, this is us, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what we want to do with your property, this is why we want to do it, these are the benefits to you. And here's a copy of our standard license. There you go. It's everything bound up, and it's all gone to the racecourse. And there's the answers to all the questions that you want to ask me. Right? Do we carry insurance? Yes. Here's a copy of the insurance. Right? All of that, and it's all in the pitch document. Boom. Because remember what I said. When you come across people like me in the real world, we're not interested in people like you because you don't earn me money. Right? So we've got to. When we're acting for our own community interest companies here, we've got to do the work. We've got to put a little piece of pitch to ourselves, and we've got to, as it says in that document earlier, imagine you're the landlord. What do I want to know about you? What are my expectations? And therefore, how close can we, around this Zoom call, get to matching and meeting their expectations? Yeah?
Brilliant.
Does that help? Okay.
Listen, Tim, here's a challenge. We've got 2 more questions. I've only got time for 1 more. But you've probably got a minute to sort of give us a very quick answer on it. I think this is quite an easy one. Will a landlord with an empty premises be able to offset their losses against tax?
No.
There you go. Oh, maybe one time for one more.
Depends on the nature of the landlord, is the answer.
Okay, so maybe not.
Losses are losses, right? If they're a limited company and they're making profits elsewhere, then of course they're going to appear in their accounts as outgoings, right? So yeah, they're going to appear in their accounts as outgoings. So in that sense, probably yes, but no landlord wants to have an empty property. That's not what they go into owning property for.
No, brilliant. So listen, I know we overran a little bit.
What was the other
one? Question was, is there anything you can do to force someone to sign a lease if someone is using a building and refuses to sign a lease?
Sorry, just do that again.
Can you force someone to sign a lease if someone is using the building and refuses to sign a lease?
No, you can't.
Cool. So listen, big thank you to Tim, and also we've become a little bit more of a bite size. We've become a bit of a chew. So thank you for the extra 10 minutes. And also, just before we sort of shoot off, just to make you aware of the sort of local trust offer, Make It Happen, which is a range of support to help you deliver your plans. It includes new and improved partner offers, including more time with partners at no cost, learning events and network opportunities. So please check that out as well. We'll be running other bite-sized sessions alongside it. So have a look at that. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you again to Tim for your time. And if you've got any questions that you didn't ask, ping them over to us and we'll see if we can get some answers for you. So
yeah, but could I just jump in there, Stephen, and say if anyone's got something that I'm not offering myself for complete free legal advice here, but if anyone's got something that they were a bit embarrassed to talk about on the screen, or they want a sense check or something, I'm very easy to find. All my contact details are out there. Give me a shout. I'll see if I can help. Okay.
And Claire's made a really good suggestion. Before we go, could please anyone put a sentence in the chat about one thing you've learned today? So thank you very much.
Thanks, folks.
Okay.
And
thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tim. The gin is on its way.
We'll see you at the next bite size. keep your eyes and ears peeled.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.